Everyone already knows that the Cosmic Fury season was the last season of this facet that we had for 30 years. After this we will have a reboot of the whole franchise, but we don't know when we will start seeing the first images of this reboot. Many still think that there is no reboot, but the reality is that this started since Hasbro bought the franchise. What they did was create the Beast Morphers and Dino Fury seasons to complete the 30 years of the franchise, since they obviously knew that doing this was going to leave them with a lot of money. If the company started a reboot without completing the 30 years, then they were going to lose that epic moment that would bring such an important celebration to the franchise. Now, with all this momentum created by the franchise's 30th anniversary celebration, Hasbro can start with a better pace and with more fan support. Even though they have that advantage, still, there are a lot of things we need to talk about first before starting this reboot. There are many questions and answers that are scarce. For now we only know that supposedly, everything is in process. This is the same thing that the new producers of the franchise have said, and we know that sometimes this phrase is used to shut the mouths of the press and the fans. For now we only know that the reboot is on hold because those who were going to be the producers deleted all the information about Power Rangers. Even so, we must be positive that someday all that will be solved and the process for the creation of all the stopped projects will continue. According to several rumors on the internet, there will be some changes in this reboot that are quite drastic, and this is something obvious since, if they want to lift the franchise, then they must make a big change. As we have said in other videos, every franchise has its essence, and this is what the producers must protect for the Power Rangers reboot to be a success. One of the rumors we have read is about changing the Zords, as they supposedly want to reduce the appearances of these battle machines and only use them when it is very necessary. We must remember that for 30 years the Power Rangers were using scenes from the Japanese series and all the Zord battles were from Japan. Even in Cosmic Fury the Zord scenes also come from the Japanese series, even though this season is separate from the Sentai and all the other scenes are Power Rangers originals, including the suits. Why did they keep using the scenes from Japan despite wanting to create an original series? Simple, it's all about money, since creating the Zord scenes is very expensive and takes a lot of time. To create these scenes, they must decide if they are going to film professionals in the Megazord's costume or if they are going to create everything in CGI. Both ways cost a lot of money and time, plus in both cases you can have bad results. For example, when they did the special episode, the producers decided to go the CGI route, and even though it looked pretty good, the animation was not of a high level. This was a very negative point for that production, since that Megazord battle is highly anticipated. Obviously, this only happened with the Megazord because the Zords separately were spectacular, even the best I've seen in the history of the franchise. According to what the producer of this special episode said, they decided to use CGI since they had little time and little budget to use the way of filming a real suit. To create this scene, they would have to find a very large space to create the set design, which was basically the floor of the moon, and possibly the background would have been a green screen, and then replace it with the sky with stars. It sounds like an easy task, but it really isn't, as this would have taken a long time and it would have been a very difficult process to create everything. Still, we know that possibly this would have been the best way, since if they can't invest in a high-level CGI, then filming with real costumes would have had a better result. As we talked about in the videos about this special episode battle, the CGI we can use to compare the Power Rangers Zords is the CGI from Transformers. These movies have incredible effects, the animation of the robots is very good, and everything looks real. We know that the budget that these movies have is very high, and this is why it is possibly better to film the scenes of the Zords, because if they do not have a very high budget to create these battles, in the end they are going to have a less impressive result. This is an important point for the reboot, since we don't know if they are going to have a big budget to invest large amounts of money in the production of the new Power Rangers universe. If Hasbro is willing to invest large amounts of money, then we could say that Power Rangers can become a great rival for any superhero franchise. This franchise has everything it needs to compete with any superhero franchise, as the Power Rangers stories have several combined elements that not all franchises possess. In the Power Rangers there is the multiverse, which is something quite complex, and this is why many franchises have not utilized it. In addition to this, the multiverse is something that few know how to use, and, in this franchise, they have taken it to another level in the comics. This is why many fans keep asking for the comics to be adapted to the TV series, and we are all hopeful that this can happen in the reboot. This is another of the topics that has been discussed for the reboot of the franchise, since according to the information that there is for now, they want to make the new TV series for an adult audience. We have talked about this many times, since for a long time the Power Rangers is not being supported by the children audience, and those who are holding the franchise are the adults. All of us adults who grew up watching this series are the ones who support this franchise, and this is why they are going to change everything. Because of this change is why they also must change the Zords, because the adult fans are not happy with the Zords we have right now. We know that these Zords that we had in many seasons were created with the purpose that they would later function as toys, and this is why the Zords are colorful. The Zords that you must build for the new facet of the Power Rangers must look real, fierce, and dangerous machines. These Zords should have a metallic texture, they should show wear and tear from all the battles, and obviously not look like a video game. The animation of these robots must be the most important thing to make these battles look real, and we know that all this is going to cost a lot of money. That is why the investment part is very important, because with this we will know if we are really going to deliver high-quality Zords. I can honestly say that even though the 2017 movie had some terribly designed Zords, they still looked great due to their texture, lighting, and the animation. If the Megazord from the special episode would have had the texture, lighting, and animation of the Zords in this movie, then we would have had the best Zord of all time, and that's exactly what we're hoping for in the reboot. In every superhero movie or TV series, there should always be two important elements, the hero and the villain. Sometimes in some hero projects, people focus too much on the superheroes and forget about the villain, but this is a mistake. Any superhero project, even some non-superhero projects, don't work without an excellent villain. It is for this reason that both parts are important, because, if in the project you have an excellent superhero, but the villain is mediocre, then it will be boring. It is also the same the other way around. If you have an excellent villain, but the heroes are mediocre, then it is not going to work either. During all this time we've been talking about the Power Rangers reboot, many have focused solely on the Rangers, but almost no one has mentioned the villains. Since the beginning of the franchise the Rangers have been the main focus, but there are villains that have been very outstanding and have taken all the attention of the audience. We can mention villains like Lord Zed, Lord Draken, Emperor Grum, and many others who have been impressive. There are also villains in other franchises that have been very famous because the project they appeared in was perfect due to how important that villain was. Some of those villains have been Thanos, the Joker, Voldemort, Darth Vader, and the list can go on and on. All of those villains I just mentioned have something very important that helps them stand out, and that is that they have appeared in projects that have been aimed at a more mature audience. This helps the villain to be seen as truly evil and their crimes to be brutal. It is for this reason, now that Power Rangers is going to be aimed for a more mature audience, that the villain must be better than all the villains that have gone through the Power Rangers franchise. The villain that they are going to create must have many important things that we are going to mention below so that the series can be successful. The most important villains always have deep stories, and this helps them to have a more important purpose. When a villain decides to attack or destroy the heroes, just because he is evil, this is not an important enough reason to stand out. Villains must have such important motives that the viewers must feel that the villain is no longer so bad and is only doing things for an important reason. Let's give some examples in order to explain this, as it is a bit complicated. In the case of the Joker, many knew that this clown was crazy, but when they delved into his story in one of the movies and viewers saw that he had a disease, many managed to empathize with the character. Another good example of this is Thanos, who only sought to create balance in the universe, and his purpose was to eliminate hunger and poverty, but his way of doing so was very radical. Thanos would eliminate half of the world's population, and this meant that there would be no shortage of food. In Thanos' mind this was a good thing. There were even people who agreed with this idea, but the reality is that it was a cruel way of doing it. Another thing a villain must have is intelligence, and this is one of the flaws that many Power Rangers villains have had. Obviously, this has been on purpose since it is a children's series, and villains should also have a bit of comedy in this type of project. In a project for a more mature audience, the villain must be very intelligent, to the point that his strategies can surprise the audience. When viewers see moves from the villain that they never expected, it makes for a better connection to the story. Smart villains are always several steps ahead, and this represents a real danger for the hero. A good example of this is Gustavo Fring from the Breaking Bad series, and it also works as an example that almost every project needs a villain, not just superheroes. Breaking Bad has been one of the most beloved series in history, and one of the most important elements was Kermit, a strategic businessman who used a false image of a fast food restaurant entrepreneur. This man was many steps ahead, and his plans were impressive. This is what an excellent villain needs, to have such secret plans that not even the smartest can decipher, and that the audience is surprised when the villain reveals his whole evil plan. Another quality a villain must have is the ability to be a real threat and appear to be invincible. When we see that the hero has the ability to defeat the villain, then our interest in continuing to watch the story diminishes, as such an easy battle is not entertaining. If the villain seems invincible, then this will create the intrigue of wanting to know how the hero is going to solve this problem and how he is going to defeat this powerful villain. The best example of this is Voldemort, a villain so impressive that from the beginning of the saga they were already talking about his immense power and how impossible it would be to defeat him. Everyone was afraid of him, no one dared to even mention his name, and this was already creating an expectation of the invincible power that this character had. Then we learned about his almost immortality, having divided his soul into several parts, and how complicated it would be to destroy that dark spell to be able to finish with this powerful villain. The same thing happened with Thanos, as after having the gems, this villain seemed invincible and we saw all the heroes being defeated easily. This is what makes any story interesting, a villain who starts winning small battles and slowly starts defeating the hero. Some excellent villains are the opposite representation of the hero, and these have a very interesting relationship. Many villains tend to be almost the same as the heroes, but each one makes different decisions, and this is what separates them between villain or hero. Some examples are Voldemort and Harry Potter, Loki and Thor, Darth Vader and Luke, Magneto and Xavier, and the list can go on. Many of these characters share many similarities, but they're completely opposite decisions, and this makes them who they are. Voldemort and Harry were very similar. Even Potter was afraid of being the same as Voldemort, but his decisions led him to be different. Another important thing that a great villain must have is charisma, and this leads him to connect with the audience in an easier way. Instead of explaining the meaning of what charisma is, the best way to describe this situation is that nobody likes a boring villain. If the times when the villain appears on stage make you want to turn off the TV, then that character doesn't have enough charisma to be able to connect with you. The villain must be so interesting that he or she must provoke the desire to want to hear every word of what he or she says and make the audience want more scenes of that character. I think the best example of this is Loki, a villain so charismatic that they had to create a whole series about this character, and the series became one of Marvel's best projects. Loki has always been very interesting, and every minute he is on the scene is exciting. This quality is not only for villains who are very talkative like Loki, it is also used by other villains who have a different style. An example of this is Darth Sidious from Star Wars, who was darker and more intimidating, but always managed to connect with the audience. All of these qualities are what describe the perfect villain, and while they are all very important, a great villain does not have to have all of these qualities to be memorable. Most of the villains I've mentioned don't have all of these qualities, but they have managed to excel at some, and that's precisely what we're looking for. We hope that Power Rangers can have a villain that is not boring, predictable and weak, as we need a character that can elevate the franchise to the highest level. Power Rangers is very important, but the villain is just as important, and that's why the new villain needs to be better than what we've seen for 30 years. For 30 years we could understand the importance of the Power Rangers weapons, and this is one of the most important parts of this fantasy universe. Now with the reboot that will be transmitted through the Disney platform, Hasbro must modify the weapons, because what we have seen is for a child audience and the reboot will be for a more mature audience. This changes things a lot since we have to modify the stories, the costumes, the villain, the effects, but also the weapons, and this is what we are going to analyze in this video. Weapons have many variations, but their purpose should always be the same, to be able to destroy the enemy or be a defensive weapon. The weapons we saw in Power Rangers have always been big, colorful, and with quite unrealistic attacks. Precisely this is what needs to change, since there are certain types of projects in which those types of weapons are perfect, but the reboot is possibly going to be more realistic, and that's why the weapons can't have so much fantasy. Obviously, they're still going to be fantasy weapons and they're going to have unrealistic attacks, but they can't be childish attacks either. There are projects that are aimed at an adult audience and have some pretty crazy things that can be almost ridiculous, but that's precisely the style they want to give it. In this case, Power Rangers needs to be a little more serious in the reboot, as in order to succeed, they need to change some things and have a little less silly fantasy. This is the hardest part, as it is quite complicated to identify what can be categorized as silly fantasy and serious fantasy. In the category of weapons, we can identify it in their design and how they are used. Weapons are something quite serious, and I think they could give a power to each one so that they can be something special. This falls under serious fantasy, since a weapon having some special power is still a fantasy. A good example of a weapon that has a special power with a design that is full of fantasy, but doesn't go to the extreme of being silly fantasy, is Saba, the White Ranger sword from Mighty Morphin. This sword has a tiger head, has a life of its own, and at the same time is still a sword that the Ranger can use to fight like any other sword. Being a sword he can use in battle gives it the realism it needs to be a serious weapon, but having a tiger head that can talk gives it the necessary fantasy without looking silly. In the comics, this sword is much more special, as it has a great connection to the web and can identify Rangers from other universes within the multiverse. Many have talked about how the reboot should be like the comics, and it is precisely this sort of thing that makes the comics so spectacular. They can give us enough fantasy without having to get ridiculous, and they stay on a serious side of the story. Some details of the weapons have a lot of similarity with the changes they have to make with the costumes, and we all know that the weapons of each Ranger must match the costume. Previously we had said that the colors of the costumes should start to be opaquer, with desaturated colors, and a little darker. This will bring a little more seriousness to the project so that it looks like a movie production for adults and not something for a child audience. Basically, this is the same thing they should do with the weapons, as many of them have bright colors like the Ranger suit, and this causes them to look like toys at times. This has been one of the weak points of some seasons, and is that the owners of the franchise have always wanted to sell Power Rangers toys since that is where they get the most profit. Because of this, they have created weapons that already look like toys so that when they make the real toys, then they look much more like the original item. One of the most iconic seasons in this was Dino Charge, and basically almost everything in that season looks like toys. Another important thing they need to change is utilization, and I'm not just talking about the ridiculous attacks that some weapons have, but also the way a ranger can attack. Because Power Rangers is rated for a children's audience, the attacks should be fairly simple and not look like they are taking someone's life. We got to see this change a bit in the special episode when Rocky destroys one of the monsters and uses the sword in a different way, basically trying to stick the sword in his chest. This is something you don't get to see in a regular season of Power Rangers, and that's why they use small explosions in each attack in order to give it a little bit of impact. Obviously, the new Power Rangers projects are not going to be R-rated, so we are not going to see attacks as gory as we have seen in R-rated movies, but we are going to be able to see more violent attacks. For now, the weapons we have seen do not cause visible damage, as the result of each attack cannot be shown as something very graphic, but must be something interpretive. This means that when a ranger succeeds in an attack, then two things can happen: the monster falls to the ground and complains in pain, or it simply explodes and disappears. In a project where the rating is higher, as it is going to be in the restart, the results of attacks can be different and much more graphic. For example, some attacks might cause the monster to break a limb, it might also bleed, and they might also have a more graphic death instead of just exploding. Don't get me wrong, I love seeing villains explode and having the background music fill that moment with a super epic feel, but this has no realism to it at all. There are moments in Power Rangers that are pretty weird in regards to this, as sometimes the monster is talking as if nothing happened and then explodes without having felt anything prior to the attack. An example of this was when Tariq attacked a monster and the monster hadn't realized anything until it exploded. In the style that Power Rangers has, this is a perfect moment as it is comical, epic and over the top, but in the style that the reboot will possibly have, this would not work. In order to understand all this, you must think that the reboot may have the same style that the 2017 movie has, which was more realistic and its fantasy did not reach the ridiculous. The story mixes all the reality with fantasy in order to create a fictional world, but with the seriousness of everyday life. Looking at it from that perspective, then imagine a ranger attacking a monster and that monster doesn't notice anything, but 2 seconds later it explodes. This is something that would be ridiculous in a style like this from the 2017 movie, and that's why the weapons should change to have a serious design with more realistic attacks, but full of serious fantasy. I think the perfect weapons should be sized appropriately and not over the top. Also, the attacks are important and I think they can vary quite a bit, but they can't become ridiculous. If the weapon is a sword, then that sword must have the same function as any normal sword, and some things can vary. For example, the sword can be made of energy and not metal. It can also be a sword of fire or a sword of a material that will never break. Those are the kind of variations we expect to see in the reboot, and we should not see a sword that stretches infinitely. Another important thing is the design of the weapon, and in this video, we have shown many different designs that are perfect for a weapon in a series aimed towards a more mature audience. Weapons should be the same as the costumes, with a not so colorful, more realistic and maybe more rustic design. What I think still needs to happen in the reboot is that the Rangers can put all their weapons together to create a more powerful weapon. This has always been iconic in the franchise and they shouldn't ignore it. Write in the comments the types of weapons you would like to see in the reboot and what power they should have. Like this video and subscribe for more serious Power Rangers fantasy.